All right, here with Danny Hall, ABCA Hall of Famer this year, all-time winningest coach in 30-plus seasons at Georgia Tech, and closing in on 1,400 wins, I think, with Kent State and Georgia Tech, and Miami of Ohio and Kent State Hall of Famer as well. So, Coach Hall, thanks for jumping on with me.
No, it's great, Ryan. Great to be here.
Hey, what are the keys for longevity in coaching?
I think I think a lot of fortune for sure. I would say, I always say this about any coach, that show me a coach that is good and they're probably a good recruiter, because if you have good players, you'll have a chance to have a good team. And but I feel very fortunate everywhere I've been, from Miami of Ohio, playing on great teams there, playing for a great coach in Bud Midall, joining his staff as a graduate assistant. That's kind of where I got my start. And him taking me to Michigan when I was 24 years old, and having a chance to coach some great players, at Michigan, one of them being a Hall of Famer and Barry Larkin. Then kind of taking a side turn, honestly, to Kent State. And going there, Bob Todd had kind of gotten that program going, a little bit. But I was able, I guess, to kind of push it over the top, and then fortunate enough to get a chance to go south and come to a great institution like Georgia Tech. That was the team I inherited, was ranked number one in the country. But I left a really good team at Kent State, and now 30 years later, here I am. But I think I've been fortunate to be around a lot of great people, a lot of great coaches, but, ultimately it comes down to, how well do your players play for you and for your school. And so that part of it just been a blessing.
What are some keys for assistant coaches staying in it? I mean, that's still recruiting as well, correct?
No, it is. And, I love telling this story. So I go to Kent State. They really didn't have an assistant coach position. So now you're trying to get, okay, who can I get to come in here for almost no pay to help me coach? Because, there's no way as just one person's going to coach a college baseball team. So I get over there, and I had coached a guy at Miami of Ohio when I was a graduate assistant there named Donnie Seeker that, I knew he was a teacher in the area around Kent. So I'm like, hey, could I get Seeker to come over after he's done with teaching school all day to help me coach? So talked to him a little bit, and then he said to me, he goes, I don't know if you know it, but he goes, Rick Rimbalak is finishing school at Akron. He just got out of pro baseball, and so Rimbalak and Seeker were freshmen at Miami of Ohio when we won the Mid-American Conference with Coach Middahl. So I said, well, do you have Rick's number? And so he gave me the number. I talked to, I always called him Remy. And so we ended up, he just told me, he goes, I want to finish school. I do want to go into coaching. And so I went to my athletic director at Kent, Paul Amadio. He's deceased, but just great man. And I wouldn't be sitting here today without, him giving me that opportunity to be a head coach. But I went to him, and he goes, well, I'll tell you what we can do. He said, let's pay for his schooling to finish. He's going to have to, come to Kent, but come over here. We'll pay for his schooling. And he goes, we'll give him a truck that we use, for like the grounds crew or whatever. So literally for the first couple years there, he's finishing school. He's helping me coach. And then he ended up, when I left to come here, being the head coach at Kent State, and then went from there to Wake. And, kind of the rest is history on that. Then I come here, and so I was hired here in kind of December, about this time of year. And so kept the staff that Jim Morris had. So Jim Morris was here. He took the job at Miami. So I kept that staff, and, and had him for a year. We ended up playing for the national championship against Oklahoma, unfortunately lost. And one of those guys, a guy named Paul Mears, he kind of went into his family business. I elevated my volunteer to be my assistant, and then we changed pitching coaches. But I
Spanky
brought a guy.
McFarland with you?
No, Spanky had left, so I think he was already at James Madison.
No,
Think
he left. Because I worked for Spanky. This is a good story,
okay.
and and Spanky and Chuck Bartlett. Chuck Bartlett's brother played at Michigan.
Yes.
But Spanky, when we'd be in the office and we talk, I'd be like, "Hey, what was your biggest regret in coaching? Because you're just trying to get experience." He said, "I should have never left Georgia Tech to go to Northern Illinois." He started the baseball program at Northern Illinois.
That's right.
And so then, and slogged through it at NIU, and then ended up getting the job at JMU. But he always I should have stayed at Georgia Tech.
Yeah, and that was the fortunate thing for me. So when the Georgia Tech job opened up, I called Ray Tanner, and I kind of had a little bit of a relationship with Ray, and I'm like, who's going to get the Georgia Tech job? And he said to me, he goes, it's wide open, because Rick Jones had just left to go to Tulane to be the head coach. So he goes, that job's going to be wide open. And, that kind of started a whole process, because I didn't know anybody at Georgia Tech, but Ray was able to put me in touch with the guy that was the head of the search committee that had played here. He was great. He was great friends with Jim Morris, and honestly helped Jim Morris put Georgia Tech on the map. And so I was able to contact him, and that kind of started the process of, I guess, them vetting me with people in the Midwest that knew me. I was very fortunate at that time. Cam Bonifay, who is an assistant GM with the Reds, was the GM of the Pirates at that time. Kent State's an hour from Pittsburgh, and so through their scout, through Cam Bonifay, it got back that, hey, I was doing a good job at Kent State, and I got an opportunity for an interview, and rest is history, as they say.
When you and Coach Memo went to Michigan, did you inherit any of those guys, or was that all recruiting with Larkin and Abbott and all those greats that you had at Michigan? Were any of those guys on campus when you guys showed up?
No. So they had lost Rick Leach, Steve Howe, and a guy named, I think, Steve Perry. So those were the three best players on those Michigan teams. But we inherited some guys that had played a lot. And then we were able, even though it was kind of late in the year, to bring some freshmen in. And some of those freshmen ended up turning into be really good players for us. But then it was just through recruiting of getting guys like Larkin, Chris Sabo, Hal Morris, Jim Abbott. I could go on and on of some great players. Casey Close, who runs Excel Sports Management, just went in the College Baseball Hall of Fame last year. So we were very fortunate. We used our Ohio ties, honestly, to recruit a lot of guys out of Ohio to Michigan. We recruited Indiana hard. We got a few from Chicago, but it was mostly Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and like I said, just what an honor to get to coach a guy like Barry Larkin and a lot of those guys I mentioned, and went to the College World Series 4 out of 8 years, which is unheard of for a Midwest school, so to speak.
For you then going to Kent, was it hard for you to leave Michigan, or was it time for you to get a head coaching job?
It was really hard, and I love telling this story because I knew we'd had great teams, and we had a great team coming back. And so I had a guy named Al Oldenburg who worked for Wilson Sporting Goods, and he was the one pushing me to put my name in the hat at Kent State. So because Al had been so good to our program at Michigan, I just felt like I owed it to him. Okay, I'm going to put my name in. And so put my name in. Well, of course, they want me to come over to Kent to interview. So I go, and I had played in the Mid-American Conference, and at that time, Kent State was a non-factor. Their facility was not good. So I go over for my interview, and the athletic director, who I've already mentioned, Paul Amadeo, he's not even there that day. Like I interview with the assistant AD, I interview with the radio guy. And the facility looked the same as when I had played there, 8-10 years ago. So I'm driving back home to Ann Arbor, and I'm like, there is no way I'm going there. And so I get back, Al Oldenburg calls me and he goes, well, how'd it go? And I'm like, Al, I go, the AD wasn't even there. I said, I'm not going there. And he said, oh, he goes, let me call him. So he calls Paul Amadeo. Of course, Paul Amadeo calls me and he goes, I'm sorry, I had something come up. Is there any way you could drive back over here? And so I guess because of Al, I'm like, okay, I'll drive back. So I drive back, meet him, and I felt good about him, honestly. Like, I felt okay, but facility hadn't changed. So I drive all the way back. I'm like, now I know I'm going to get offered the job. And I'm like, I'm going to turn it down. And so go to sleep. That's in my mind. I'm turning it down, get up the next morning. I'm shaving. And for what, I'll just say it like this. It was probably the good Lord looking down on me. And it got in my head that, okay, it's time for you to go cut your teeth and be a head coach. And even though this probably isn't maybe the greatest opportunity, but, maybe it's the right opportunity. So I said, if they call, I'm going to take it. So that's kind of what happened. But here's kind of the untold story, I think, of Kent State. So I go there my first 2 years. The first team I inherited was an older team. But so I coached those guys. I think we were 27 and 25 or 28 and 26. Had some guys get drafted on that team, but the roster turned over immediately because there was a lot of older guys on the team. So I was able to recruit a good incoming freshman class. One of those guys is Greg Beals, who was my first catcher I recruited. And Greg's now at Marshall, was at Ohio State, coached at Ball State. So by turning that over, I felt like, okay, I got kind of my guys in here, and you got to coach them and develop them. But in my second year there, our president at the time was a guy named Michael Schwartz, diehard Chicago Cubs fan. Grew up in Chicago, loved baseball. He convinced at the time that I took the job, the Mid-American Conference, the cap on scholarships was 8 for baseball. So Dr. Schwartz went to all the presidents and he said, I think we should take the cap off of the baseball scholarships. And at that time it was 13. God, we'd love to have that right now. But so he convinces all the presidents to take the cap off. And they did it with the idea that, hey, Kent State may take the cap off and go to 13, but if Ohio U only wants to go to 10 or whatever, they could choose to do whatever they wanted to do. So they voted in. And so we immediately go from 8 scholarships to 13, which was critical because the Big Ten at that time had 13. And then, so that was the one thing, like that just gave you a much wider variety of scholarship money to go get some players. The second thing that happened is that Kent State decided at that time they were going to build an indoor football practice facility that also had, up and down cages, had a track around the football field. So from a recruiting standpoint and a development standpoint, in my mind, that's why we just we took off when that happened. And a lot of it was because of, Rick Rimbalak. And the other guy I'd love to mention, he's passed away. So I kind of recruited literally a Sandlot coach named Dick Schoonover.
I was going to ask you about Scooney.
And that totally took our program to a different level as well, because Scooney was an outstanding pitching coach, developed literally 2 first-rounders while I was there, and Dustin Hermanson and Travis Miller. And so, it wasn't just me doing it. It was our president, it was guys like Dick Schoonover and Rick Rimbalak that just helped me tremendously kind of get the program off and running at Kent.
And a good pocket of baseball in that area, too, where there wasn't a national recruiting scene yet, where you had a really good pocket where maybe a lot of schools weren't getting into yet. They are now, but you had a good pocket of baseball up in that corner of Northeast Ohio.
No question. And so many just good athletes in Ohio. And, like most kids that grow up, then, they played football or, they played football, basketball, and baseball. So, maybe they weren't quite good enough to be a Division I football player, but now they go into the spring of their senior year and, okay, I'm a pretty good baseball player. So I was able to get a lot of those guys kind of late that developed late, or they figured out, okay, now I got to put all my eggs in this basket of baseball. And so just fortunate, that way. And then the other thing I would say is that I had a great relationship with a guy named Gene Bennett, who ended up being an assistant GM of the Cincinnati Reds. But Gene Bennett was the scout in the Midwest for the Reds that signed Barry Larkin, signed Chris Sabo, signed all these guys that played for the Cincinnati Reds. And he would go around the Midwest with tryout camps throughout the summer. And if he saw somebody that he thought was a good player, he would call me and say, hey, I think you need to go, kind of see, this guy. And so, I'd go see him, and he's usually right. And then we'd start the recruiting process of just trying to get some of these guys. And then also at that time, Youngstown was kind of where all the Connie Mack baseball, like state tournaments and regional tournaments happen. American Legion baseball was still really good there. And so you just, you got in your car and you drove and watched as many games and as many players as you could, and then tried to convince them to come to Kent State.
Yeah, I don't think people realize how much the pro scouts and the college coaches worked together back then, just to help each other. Like, that's changed a lot. Like, it's not the relationship anymore. But back then it was, my dad had so many good pro scouts that helped him get players, because you talk to him all the time.
Yeah, no doubt. And I would say it like this. One of them is probably his recommendation to Cam Bonifay, the GM of the Pirates. So it's a guy named Steve Demeter, played in the big leagues. His grandson ended up playing for me, Derek Dietrich. But when Steve was called to ask about me, he basically told Cam Bonifay, he goes, one of the best coaches in the Midwest. He's got great players. He's got great relationships with the scouts. And, here I am. So, I've always valued that. I think, college coaches and scouts need to work together. We're trying to help players become major league players, so to speak. But yeah, I wouldn't be sitting here today without guys like Gene Bennett that, were just, great friends and cared about the kids.
And Georgia Tech's always had good Ohio players too, always.
We have.
No, we have. I mean, you look down the laundry list. I mean, Derek Dietrich's one. Like, you look down the laundry list, and I coached Corey Vance and Jason Basil in the Cape League. And so, and I had played in the Cape and played against some really good Georgia Tech players too. But it's amazing to think that the good players out of Ohio that have played at Georgia Tech.
No, we've been very fortunate. And, and you kind of mentioned it. Now everybody recruits in there, and they're just – There's no diamonds in the rough or secrets anymore between, perfect game and prep baseball and all the things and opportunities, honestly, that kids have now to, be seen by college coaches.
And so the Georgia Tech job is there late. So Coach Morris, I mean, he'd had a whole fall with those guys. So how was it getting there that late? Because I did that a couple different times where you're getting there late. How was that, trying to get that going?
I think the thing that helped me is that it wasn't late to go to Kent State, but it was an older team. And so it was like, you could probably change some things to do some things to make those guys better, but they were pretty much set in their ways, and probably the culture, was set. So come to Georgia Tech, like it's literally, the convention hits and we come back from the convention and we're practicing. So we had 22 players on the team, and I love telling this story. Like, it's great now that we have 40-man rosters or 35-man rosters, but we played for the national championship against Oklahoma with 22 players. One of them was a football player that just decided to come out named Jimmy Lincoln. And Jimmy would tell you he's not a great baseball player, but he could run. He was a great clubhouse guy. We'd had a pitcher go down. So we were literally probably in Omaha with 20 players at that time. But here's what I knew. I had Jason Varitek, and so that's a good place to start. He had already been a first round pick his junior year. They couldn't sign him. So I'm very fortunate that I roll in here and I got an All-American catcher. I've got Nomar Garciaparra, All-American shortstop, an Olympian at that time. Those guys could play in the Olympics, so he and Varitek were on the Olympic team. Payton, who was from Ohio and was very instrumental in me getting an interview here because I had recruited him when I was at Kent State. So he knew me. And then they had a guy named Brad Rigby who ended up on that team being a second-round pick. So I had an ace pitcher. I had a great catcher, great shortstop, great center fielder. And then there were some great role players, but there was no depth. There was no depth in the pitching staff, just no depth on the field. But it was kind of just, okay, here's my ideas, and here's how I think, we can enhance what you guys have already done. But those guys, the ones I mentioned, were such great leaders that they had the clubhouse under wraps. And I'll always say this, is that Jason Varitek, as great of a player that he was in college and also as great of a player as he was in the major leagues, he's probably the hardest worker I've ever had. And so when you're one of your best players is the hardest worker, that just sets the tone for everybody else. And I love telling this story. So my first game at Georgia Tech, we're playing Minnesota. John Anderson, who I knew really well, I'd consider John Anderson a friend. He's been coaching longer than I have, by the way. And so we're playing, that's who we're playing, first game of the year. So we ended up winning that series. I think we won all three games, but here's where I'm going with it. Jason Varitek, first pitch he sees that weekend, hits a home run. He goes 8 for 10 on the weekend. The series ends. We're in old Russ Chandler Stadium. I'm kind of in the little office shower area where the coaches showered. Knock on the door. It's Varitek, and he goes, "Hey, what time are you going to get here tomorrow?" And I looked at him and I go, "What time you want me to get here?" He goes, "How about 1 o'clock?" I'm like, "All right." I said, what you got?" He goes, "My swing doesn't feel right." And I'm looking at him, I'm like, this guy just went 8 for 10 on the weekend. First pitch he sees, he hits a home run. So I knew when he had that type of attitude, he knew himself well, that he wasn't satisfied with 8 for 10. I mean, I would have been patting myself on the back like, hey, great weekend. But that just wasn't the way he was wired. And so just the leadership of that team just made it easy for me to just enjoy the ride with. We ended up with 3 first-round picks, and Rigby was the first guy picked in the second-round pitcher. So just, one of those things that, I'll never forget.
Going to the College World Series, I mean, you and Miami are on the opposite sides of the bracket. Did your players want to play Miami at some point because Coach Morris had just left?
Yeah, we had ended up, playing them some, not with those guys, though. So kind of by the time Miami had rolled, into our league, most of the players probably that he had coached had
and I was talking about Omaha because, I mean, you both end up making it to the World Series that year. You're on opposite sides of the bracket in '94. Oklahoma came through that side of the bracket. And you think we talked earlier about how much college baseball has changed. That was still the 6-team regional format, and then it was a straight double elimination tournament in Omaha, which is that's a long tournament to try to beat everybody twice. You think how far we've come, and I think the game's in such a great place now because of some of those switches that we've made over time with the tournament bracket.
No, I do too, and I think particularly the championship format in Omaha, the best team or the team that probably deserves it. If you get through that juggernaut, and it's a 2 out of 3 series, which we all play, and I'll be honest, I would like to see him change the regional format now to where there's. I guess what would it be? 32? It'd
be 2 out of 3. You just put another weekend on the front of it. Where it's 2 out of 3 the whole way through. I think that would be a great. Mike Rooney's been on that for a long time, where you basically seed 1 through 64 the entire tournament.
I agree, and I just think it spreads out on campuses throughout the United States. More campuses and fan bases get a chance to see the great teams trying to make it to Omaha. I'd love to see that. I don't know if it'll happen, but that's where my head would go with it.
I mean, and by the way, you've had Matt Wieters, Mark Teixeira. Like, I mean, you've had some of the best. Like, not just like of their era. You're talking about some of the best hitters of all time in their era. I mean, you go back to Larkin. Like, just you look at the laundry list, and you said that about Varitek. Was that the separator with those types of players as they want to continue to get better?
No question. So I mentioned, and we've mentioned Barry Larkin, so the story on him. I mean, he's a second round pick out of high school, and his mother basically said, "You're going to college." And his brothers had all played college football for the most part. All his visits at that time were in our football because he was the captain of the Cincinnati Moeller football team when he was a senior. So we were fortunate to get him because his mom's like, "I want you to go to school first." So the talk at that time was this guy's going to be a center fielder. He's kind of rough around the edges at shortstop, blah blah blah. So I'll never forget like laying my eyes on him. He's a freshman, and I can't wait. Okay, I want to hit this guy some ground balls, just see what it looks like. And literally after like 2 days, I looked at Bud Midall and I'm like, center field. You know what? I go, this guy's going to be a shortstop, and rest is history. So have the chance to coach him, elite player. Now I'm coming to Georgia Tech, and all the talks about Nomar Garciaparra. So I'll never forget the first practice we had. It had rained and we couldn't get on our field. So me being in the Midwest, like, you got to adapt. So the football stadium here was turf at the time. So I'm like, all right, boys, grab your gloves, and it's it's a couple blocks, but we're going to the football stadium. We're going to get some ground balls today because I wanted to see Garciaparra. And so practice, watch him move, watch him throw everything. And I'm like, okay, I always said, hey, I'll never coach another player like Barry Larkin. And he's a Hall of Famer. So, okay, yeah, it's hard to get there, but Nomar's right there with him. And so after one practice, I'm like, boy, do I have a great shortstop here in Nomar. And, and then Teixeira just, I like telling this story. So I wasn't recruiting him. Like, not recruiting him at all. I had seen him, and I'm like, that guy's a first rounder. I'm not going to waste my time. And so I wasn't recruiting him. And I get a phone call from a guy that was advising him, and he's like, why aren't you recruiting Mark Teixeira? And so kind of told him. He said something to me. It's just one of those things that sticks in your mind. He goes, well, I'll tell you this. If he's not a first rounder, he's going to school. And so I'm like, okay. So we end up having him in on a visit on a Wednesday. School was in session here. Bring him in on a Wednesday. He stays with some of our players, watches this practice, and by Friday, he commits to come here. So you're still like, okay, we got to get through the draft, the whole 9 yards. So the night before the draft, I called his house. He's from Severna Park, Maryland. His mom answered the phone. Mark wasn't there. Dad wasn't there. So just talked to her for a little bit. And the last thing she said to me, I mean, again, just one of those things that hits you. She goes, well, Coach, she goes, I'm praying that Mark gets a chance to go to school. And lo and behold, that's exactly what happened. But to your kind of point in your question, from day one, Mark Teixeira knew what he wanted, how he was going to get there, and there wasn't anything going to get, in his way. Wieters kind of just same way. All those greats, they Teixeira says it, and I love using this line. I'm at a great academic institution, and what people do that get degrees from here, including my players, is just unbelievable. But Mark Teixeira said this. He goes, I went to Georgia Tech to major in baseball. He goes, and school was a little bit secondary. He kind of says it that way, but he was also an academic All-American. So I'm like, all right, Tex, But I think that's true for all the great ones. They're picking a school that they think can accelerate, their journey to the big leagues. And so, those guys that you've mentioned, I've been fortunate. So I think I've been here 30. I've had 32 major league players in 30 years. And,
Charlie Blackmon now, too. I mean, that's another up and coming. You talk about a guy like unorthodox, but he's very in tune with the new style of hitting. And there's another one that adjusted with the times. And so, like, you can go down back to the 80s to now. Like, you've developed elite hitters in every generation of hitting, and the teaching part has changed a little bit. I still think hitting's the same as it always been. You've got to be a good hitter. There's some art and some magic to hitting, but you've had a guy in every generation where it's like, okay, that's the best in their generation of hitting.
That's always been the goal, and I've always been more on, I guess, that side of the baseball. I've always worked with infielders, but enjoyed certainly working with hitters and the hitting part. And I've been fortunate. Like I've got a great hitting coach here right now, and James Ramsey. He's a great player at Florida State, but he's done a tremendous job since he's been here of just continuing to develop our hitters, and was very instrumental in Kevin Parada being a first round pick. But it's not just me, but I have always found a lot of joy just in working with position players, and we've been fortunate here at Tech that a lot of these guys are getting opportunities to continue to play, and they're playing well. And since I've been here, we've had $200 million guys in the big leagues in Teixeira and Charlie Blackmon, and there's not too many schools that can say that. So we'll hang our hat a little bit on that, but the credit to the players. Charlie Blackmon was a pitcher till his senior year, so he made this when he kind of made the transition from pitching to hitting. He's made it work, and you mentioned it. He's very cerebral, very smart.
I love listening to him to talk about hitting. I love it because I was that way as a hitter, so I really like listening to him talk about hitting.
He's awesome.
How have you been able to stay kind of with that fundamental approach? That's not always flashy, and it's not going to get a bunch of play, but you have stayed with the fundamentals your entire career.
I'll say it like this. Like, I think you have to, be willing to change. And I think you always got to be a lifelong learner. And, I grew up in a household. My dad, much like you, was my high school football and baseball coach. And God bless him. He's passed away. My mom's still alive, but they were both teachers. So grew up in a house of educators, and from time I was born, that was drilled in my head, like education is important. But I think you have to learn, and there's so much that you can get exposed to today with Twitter, Instagram, and everybody's teaching this and that. But I think a lot of it is just, I love watching how major league players move and how they hit, and, what that looks like. And then, you watch your own players, and it's like, okay, this is what it looks like. This is how I think we can tweak it, get you better. But to your point, and I say it like this, like we have every piece of technology that somebody could have, and we use it a lot, honestly, to help us develop these guys and kind of mold them. But at the end of the day, the hitter has to step in the box and have a plan and have an approach to try to hit that guy that's trying to get him out. And it comes down to competition, your plan, your preparation, and you hope that it's good enough to make them certainly successful. So we're using it all, and that's why I say I think you just have to keep your eyes open, be able to adapt, be able to change what you think you need to change to make your players better, your team better. And there's a lot of great teams out here now. I mean,
we talked about it when I called you. How do you help your players stay confident through not just your conference schedule, but your non-conference schedule too? And you've had a lot of success with young players playing too. How do you kind of help nurse them through the entire season when they're not going to probably go 8 for 10 like Varitek did? That's just not a possibility with your guys' schedule. How do you help them stay confident through that process?
It's really hard. I'll say it like this. We had a conversation yesterday with some of our upperclassmen. We're getting ready next week to start finals. So, I think today's the last day we can kind of be around our guys with NCAA rules. And so we had that exact conversation, like, okay, what are the goals? How are we going to get there? And so we bring up non-conference competition. And it was like, our weekend series. So we play 30 games in the ACC. we play Auburn twice and then play all the teams in our state that are all real good midweek. And so, you lose a midweek game and you feel terrible about it. And some of them are games you feel like, okay, we should have won. Our guys didn't play as hard, weren't as focused as much as they should have been. And now you're right into playing Miami or Virginia or Wake or somebody in our league. And so it's hard to keep them focused. I think, if I had all the answers, we probably wouldn't lose many of those midweek games. But I do think that it helps them understand just the day-to-day prep that they need to do to kind of, almost forget about who you're playing. But here's the standard, let's play to our standard, not somebody else's. And there's probably going to be a lot of adversity in a lot of those midweek games. You're going to get behind, or you're going to have a lead and you're going to blow it. You're going to have to try to hang in there and win it late. But those are all things I think that teach us, okay, now we got to go play all these ACC schools, and hopefully we're in a regional and we're playing a mid-major that is really good, and we've kind of seen what what that looks like. And it's kind of funny. We have a kid that transferred in here from a mid-major, and his comment yesterday was, he goes, if we were playing an ACC team, he said, we were going to start one of our best guys.
It's their bullpen day anyway.
And then he goes, if we had a lead late, we're bringing in our best guys to pitch. He goes, if we were behind, you never saw them. And I'm like, yeah, that's where it's at with a lot of these mid-majors, and I can't blame them at all. I'd be trying to do the same thing.
My senior year was 97. We actually played you guys, and we had a young team. I think there was like 6 freshmen that played in that lineup with me, and so we got pounded on Friday night. You guys did end up winning the ACC that year, but you guys played Macho Man. That was your home run song back then. And so Friday night, I'm tired of hearing that song, but we go out, and our bus is there. It's locked, and our bus driver is nowhere to be found. So we waited like an hour and a half. Our bus driver shows up. You guys were feeding your family and team like down the line, and we're sitting on the curb. And our bus driver shows up in a cab. He went and swam. He didn't know how long games were. And my dad, my dad was not happy. We had just gotten pounded, and then our bus driver didn't show up.
Yeah, that's no fun. No doubt. You just want to, if you lose, you just want to get on that bus and get to the hotel.
I mean, over your time, we talked a little bit about some legislation changes. What do you feel like probably affected college baseball the most from a legislation standpoint over the years?
I would just say what's happening now, the transfer portal and, the NIL money has totally changed it. And, I won't mention who, but I had a conversation with this guy, and he's been a head coach at Power Fives, and he's been a coach at a mid-major. And he said to me the other day, he goes, I'll never go back and coach a mid-major, because he said, I don't want to develop my players for, Power Five schools or bigger schools that are just going to come in and get them some NIL
Yeah, but
money.
It was happening in summer ball. When I was playing and coaching in summer ball, before we put the transfer rule in, it was happening. So, I mean, that's been a part of college baseball. It wasn't for a while because we had the transfer rule, but that was part of college baseball way back.
No question. No, you're 100% right. That's how it happened, was in the Cape and other leagues that, guys were playing well or had really good years. So you're right on that. And, but I think that's been the biggest change for me, is just, the recruiting never ends, and the recruiting pool has expanded. And, and the NIL money is the NIL money. It's just, it's where we're at. And
are there ways to put guardrails on it?
I would hope so. I don't know what that's gonna look
The student
like.
athletes have so much power now that I don't think they want it, and so
No.
they have probably in a good way, they have a bigger voice in the process now than they've ever had in the past. But I just don't think the student athletes want it.
Yeah, I don't think that. No, I guarantee you they don't. And
but 18 to 24-year-olds, they really don't know what they want yet either, though. So like that goes two ways. It's like you're giving them everything, but they're not going to be mature enough to make some of those decisions sometimes, where you have to have some guardrails for them too.
And I think in our sport, just more than any other, I mean, you got so many kids that they're all on partial scholarships for the most part. So any little extra cash that you can put in their pocket just makes it better for them and makes it better for us. So, I think that's the probably unintended consequences for baseball, is that some of these guys can get more money, and it's just less of a burden on them and their parents.
How do you keep your mentality going every year? I mean,
I love it. I mean, I kind of mentioned it. So, I grew up in a household, and I'll kind of give you my backstory. I think this is a great story as well. So, grew up, dad, I was in a gym on a field from the time I was little, and I loved it. Like, that's just what I wanted to do. I played football, I played basketball, I played baseball. And so go to school at Miami of Ohio. It's a really good academic institution. I'm a pre-med major because I had it in my mind I'm going to be a doctor. So for a good chunk of my time at Miami of Ohio, I mean, that was my mentality.
That was my track too. Pre-med was my track.
Okay. So wanted to get drafted. And then after my junior year, that didn't happen. And so I was playing for a guy named Don Purvis, who was at that time the head baseball coach at Bowling Green in the Central Illinois Collegiate League. And at the end of the summer, he came up to me and he goes, what are you going to do, if you don't get a chance to play pro baseball? So I said, well, I'm pre-med major. I said, I'm going to try to go to medical school. And he said, you ever think about coaching? And I said, well, my dad was my coach. I saw what he did, and I'm just not sure I want to, do that. Last thing he said, he goes, well, I think you'd be very good at it. And so then he doubles down. And he said, if you change your mind, he goes, I want you to be a graduate assistant for me. Okay. So kind of get back to school, start thinking about it. I literally call him and I said, hey, are you serious about, me being a graduate assistant? He's like, yeah. And I said, all right, I'll do it. So kind of senior year, kind of think, okay, next year I'm going to go to grad school at Bowling Green. And so we're in our season now, and we're on our longest trip every year was to Central Michigan. So we're on the bus, and Bud Middle had a graduate assistant, but it was a 2-year position, and I knew that this guy was coming back. So I'm a captain of the team, sitting in the back of the bus. We're on our way to Central Michigan. The graduate assistant comes back, and he said, hey, coach wants to see you. And Bud Middle always sat in the front seat on the right. So go up, and he goes, sit down. And he said, hey, I'm hearing that you're going to go to Bowling Green to be a graduate assistant. And I said, yeah, I've told Coach Purvis, he offered it to me. And so I told him I'm going to do it. He said, well, why wouldn't you want to be a graduate assistant at Miami of Ohio? I said, well, you already have one. I knew you had one and wasn't going to be possible. He goes, what if I get 2? And so now I'm like, there's no shot he's getting 2. So I don't know. It's like a month later, same thing. We're on the bus going somewhere. Here comes, the GA. Hey, coach wants to see you. So get up there, and he goes, well, I talked to Coach Schreider. Dick Schreider was the AD at Miami High. He's going to give me a second GA. He goes, so I assume you're going to stay here and coach with me. And I said, well, Coach, I gave Coach Purvis my word. I just don't feel like I should go back on my word. Well, I don't get a word in for about 60 miles. Like, he is wearing me out. So I always say this, one of the biggest decisions that I ever made in my life was made for me by Bud Middle. And so I will forever be grateful that he did that. Nothing against Coach Purvis, but I know I wouldn't be sitting here today without that conversation and him just, he was not going to take
Well, that's
no
part of
for
being a good recruiter too, is recruiting your assistant coaches also. That's part of it
yeah.
too.
Yeah. So that's kind of how it all, got to this point.
Do you have a process for after season to help you recharge and get ready for the next season?
You kind of you basically you're always worried about the draft, like how's it going to impact your freshmen, how's it going to impact the guys you have. So I would say, for sure the first month you're still engaged in all the recruiting and doing all that. I don't have a bunch of hobbies, so I love what I'm doing. I love being in certainly the middle of some of the recruiting and just everything that goes into being a head coach at a Power Five in a great conference. This is kind of the time of year where it's the reset button a little bit. Our guys are taking finals. We can't spend time with them, and so it's time just to get your head right, be around your family, and get ready to go for the convention. I think that's the great thing about the convention. That's kind of the start for college baseball, and so always look forward to it.
And you got Matt Wieters back on staff as a student assistant.
Yeah, so he graduates in December, and so he's got 3 boys, so he's heavily involved in coaching right now, but he'll be around our program after he graduates. But it's been a pleasure, really, the last almost 2 years to have him around our players. He's more quiet, but boy, when he speaks, it's one of those you better have your ears open and listen to what.
He's a lead by example guy.
Yes. And then we have Deck McGuire as my student assistant. Deck was the first rounder here. So, we've been fortunate that way. And living in Atlanta, a lot of our pros live here. And so, they're around constantly working out, and it gives our guys a chance to see them up close and personal. And, hey, this is what it looks like. And
plus, for recruiting for you all being in Atlanta, like you don't have to go very far everybody comes to you all. Like with the tournaments that are going on in the summer and the fall, like everybody comes to you all.
So, hey, we have great summer programs. We have great high school programs. That's great. And if you look at our roster, the majority of our roster is always, going to have a lot of Georgia kids on it. You've kind of mentioned, though, like with us being kind of the academic school that we are, like we will venture out and get some really, really good players from other states to come in here and play. The bad part about it now, the good part on the recruiting end is we sleep in our beds. We don't have to go spend a bunch of money in recruiting, and you got hotel nights and food. You're sleeping in your bed every night. But yeah, all the perfect game events that roll in here. Now we've got PBR at Lake Point. So a lot of stuff happens in our state where kids from all over the United States come in here and play all summer. So yes, it is great to, kind of be in a hub for amateur baseball.
Do you have a fail forward moment? Everybody has to answer this one. Do you have something you thought was going to sidetrack you, but looking back now, it helped you move forward?
Boy, that's a great question. Probably not one. I would probably say it like, so I'm at Michigan, and, the other part, and I think most people can relate to this. So Bud takes me to Michigan at 24 years old to be his assistant. What he didn't tell me was it wasn't going to be a paid position with benefits. So I literally punched the clock for 2 years on the grounds crew, took care of the field, but I'm coaching full time. And in my third year, then I became a full-time coach, So
I always say part-time pay, full-time hours.
Yes.
That's what it was back then. It was part-time pay and overtime hours.
Yes. And so there was plenty of days when I had a shovel in my hand or a rake or a wheelbarrow that I'm like, I've got a master's degree and this is what I'm doing. And so it reached a point where it was a Michigan baseball alum. He was in the insurance business, and he said, "You ever think about, getting in the insurance business?" And I'm like, I haven't really given it much thought. So he kind of talked to me about it. Well, he convinces me to take, I guess, personality test or one of these tests. Well, evidently I like scored really high on this test. Now it's a full court press to try to get me to switch from coaching into the insurance business. And so that was probably the one moment that just really tested my patience, so to speak. But, I always say that, the man upstairs has the plan.
You got to trust it. It's so hard
Yeah.
sometimes, but you just got to trust the whole process to it. It's going to work out probably the way it should.
Yes, and so I definitely think that even that, and then making the decision to go to Kent State, it's guided by your faith and faith in yourself. Of you got to believe in yourself and anything you're doing, and believe that things are going to work out the way they should.
You mentioned Scooney. I mean, what was so different about him as a pitching coach?
Well, if you're ever around Scooney, he had a hearing aid, so he had a hard time hearing.
Harvey Shapiro coached with him for a while in the Cape League,
Yes,
but he loved
yes,
Scooney.
he did. Yes, and but I always said he was a grandfather figure to our pitchers. Like, just had that presence of being able to get their attention. He was very simple with them. Like, he didn't go way overboard with mechanics or any of that. It was, he would always say, work fast, throw strikes, change speeds. That was him, and he never got away from that. And but he had the knack of making you believe that you're Roger Clemens, and he had that ability with every pitcher on our staff to make them believe they could get anybody out they were trying to get out.
Do you have any evening or morning routines? You said you don't have any hobbies really other than baseball, but do you have?
I'll play some golf, but I still like to work out. I think that's the great thing about this job is that, you get a chance to, we have a weight room in our stadium. And so, I used to jog a lot. I don't do that as much, but love to walk, still lift some weights, and, very involved with our infielders. So swing that fungo bat, a lot when we're in practice mode. But
what are your go-tos in the weight room?
I'm just more of just a circuit. Like, I'll try to hit all the groups, and I don't kill myself in there. But
I don't either.
I like to try to, stay. Now,
I say
got
if you're sore at this age, you're doing too much.
Yeah, sore you might hurt yourself. That's where I don't want to do anything to where I would hurt myself. And people always talk about, well, the big thing now is pickleball. So I love telling this story. So I hadn't played it kind of because I'm just like, I just don't know if that is going to be good. Like, I love to compete, trust me. So everybody's like, well, the court's smaller. You don't have to move as much if you're playing doubles. So we have a kid that played for me. He's a great player here named Stephen Blackwood. He's an orthopedic surgeon now. So Blackwood, 2 summers ago, has his son in my camp. So he came down one afternoon to pick him up. And so I'm like, hey, Blackie, I go, how's it going? He goes, Coach, pickleball is keeping me in business. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, I must do 10 Achilles tendon surgeries a week with people getting hurt in pickleball. So now I've got that. I'm like, I'm not sure.
Well, people don't warm up. Like, that's the thing. Like, people don't do any sort of warm up. They just jump into it, and it's an explosive activity. We used to have that in PE class in high school. We played pickleball, and it's a fun game, but people just roll out of the car and just start going after it. Like, that's where you're going to blow your Achilles out.
I know. And so from that standpoint, now I have messed around a little bit with my 2 boys. So, and they're way younger than me and both played here and great athletes. So, you gotta kind of deal with that. But I could easily see myself like, getting more involved with that as long as I feel like, okay, not going to get hurt. But there'll be a time for that at some point in time.
How was it coaching your boys?
Awesome. Like debated it. Like, do I, is this the right thing? And I played for my dad. So, and that was a great experience for me. So I based a lot of it on, hey, I love playing for my dad. And so the older one, it kind of came down to Georgia Tech and Stanford. And we went out to Stanford, and Mark Marquis showed us around and talked to my son, and certainly gave him, a great opportunity to go there. But he ended up choosing here. And then the younger one, I probably gave him a little more freedom in the recruiting, to see some other schools. And I'm just going to be dead honest. I thought he was going to go to Florida State, play for, Mike Martin Sr. And, his two assistants were Mike Martin Jr. and Mike Bell. And so kind of thought that's what was going to happen. And it was probably Thanksgiving time. He's in the house and he sat down on the couch and he goes, well, I know where I'm going to school. And so we all kind of perk up like, okay, here it comes. And so he said, hey, I want to go to Georgia Tech. And but just in honesty, it's been a blessing to, I just say it like this, like you get to hang around your kids and watch them develop as young men for a few more years. And your dad was, a college coach. Like that takes you away from your family quite a bit. And so you miss out on some high school games and stuff. I never tried to, summertime I didn't miss a lot. Like I got a chance to, because they played at a high level, so I could say, hey, I'm watching my sons play, but I'm also recruiting, seeing other players that they're playing against. But I just think it was a blessing, and I think they would tell you it was a blessing. And
my mom came in town the last couple of days. We talked about it last night. I told somebody that. I was like, I don't think my relationship would be as close to my dad now as it would have been if I hadn't played for him because of that, because you do miss a lot with them being gone, where being around my dad and brother for 4 years playing and then getting to coach with them for 2 years, I don't think my relationship would be as close. We'd still be close, but not like it would have been if I hadn't played for him.
Yeah. And the oldest one is an agent now, works for Excel Sports Management, Casey Close. And then the youngest one is in orthopedic sales, kind of in the medical device industry. But got both of them here now. The oldest one was in New York City for a couple years, kind of working side by side with Casey Close, and now he's moved back here, just himself in the hotbed of all these great baseball players that we are surrounded by. And then the youngest one is trying to carve out his niche in the orthopedic sales world.
What are some final thoughts before I let you go?
I'm just super excited, to join this, and I'd say it like this: like it's a blessing to see Brian O'Connor go in, who we've competed against for years, to see Jim Morris, who I replaced here. We're going in the same class, and then the other one is Tim Petterini. So just being able to see what he did at the College of Worcester. My wife is from Worcester, Ohio. Her dad went to the College of Worcester. So I think that makes it neat, like very aware of being in the ABCA chairs, being president at one point in time of all the greats that are in this Hall of Fame. And
Jim Wells, too. I mean, Jim Wells was one of my idols,
yes.
Coaching idols when I was coming through.
And my pitching coach right now played for Jim for 1 year at Alabama. So that's what makes it neat. Like you're in select company, but you're around great people that have done a lot of great things for the game of baseball, and you always want to you aspire to get to that level. And then the other thing I think I said this to Brian O'Connor, is that I wish my dad was alive to see it. I know he's going to look at it, but my mom is, and that just meant a lot to me.
Yeah, Brian, I know he was going through a lot last year, being in Omaha, and he's going through it right now. But
no doubt,
part of it. It's part of it. So
yeah,
I appreciate your time, Coach. This was awesome.
Awesome. Please, tell your dad.
Thank you, sir. Yep.
Loved him always. All right, take care. Have a good day.
Yep.